Second theology in seminary was an exciting year for me, and I remember it vividly. When I entered second theology, the reason it was so exciting is because I knew that this meant I was 1 year away from ordination to the diaconate. And that simple fact coated every arduous class, every endless obligation with a joy, because I knew that no matter what happened or where I found myself, there was a light at the end of the tunnel. Except it wasn't very long before I found myself in one of the greatest crises I would experience as a seminarian. The year was 2011, and another scandal in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia had broken out. But because I was new at Catholicism, for me it was the first. Now, most of the priests on the list that had come out, they were already dead, and so that for me wasn't really the challenging part. The challenge was watching the bishops struggle between that natural impulse of self-preservation and yet the call to do what is right, or even just figuring out what the right thing is when it's not always as black and white as we'd hope. And in the midst of all of this, people are getting angry. The trust between priests and their bishops is breaking down profoundly. In fact, a priest union even formed because they were afraid and they needed some recourse of action. And the church that I knew, that I had fell in love with, that I was about to commit myself to permanently, was being ripped out of my grasp. I remember going on apostolate that week on a Thursday and seeing the look on the pastor's face. He was terrified. And I wondered within me, what am I signing up for here? Who's going to have my back if I get falsely accused? And so my thoughts started to spiral, and without even thinking, I already began reaching for my own kind of lifeboat. Now, this is the space that the church is putting us in today with her readings. And the space I'm talking about is this. What do you do when the shepherds are bad? What do you do? In Malachi, we listened as God was correcting the Levitical priests. And maybe you'll remember that among all the 12 tribes of Israel, when the Israelites were journeying through the desert, it was only the tribe of Levi that refused to participate in the idolatrous worship of this golden calf. They instead chose to be faithful to God and to be faithful to Moses. And as a result of that, God set them as priests over all of his people. And yet now, 1,000 years later, in the prophet Malachi, their faithful heart, we see, no longer remains. And so God says to them, "You have turned aside from the way and have caused many to falter by your instruction." There's a similar problem here in the background of what we heard in the gospel. The gospel focused really on the scribes and the Pharisees, but keep in mind, the Sadducees were the high priestly class among the people, but they had failed to instruct the people appropriately in the law of God. And so in this vacuum arose what became known as the scribes and the Pharisees. And even they are the ones whom Jesus is rebuking today for themselves getting caught up in all the vanity of the office and the abuse of power. The vein of corruption proceeds throughout all of the church's history. Jesus ordained Judas to the Catholic priesthood, and he went off to betray him. The apostles ordained Nicholas as one of the original 7 deacons, who became a heretic and started a heretical cult. A corrupt bishop put Joan of Arc to death for his political advantage. And similarly, a corrupt bishop restricted the faculties of Padre Pio out of jealousy. A corrupt priest, Martin Luther, started the Protestant Revolution that splintered the bride of Christ into 1,000,000 pieces. And even today, some priests and bishops insist on sowing confusion, division, and scandal in the church. Which brings us back to that question. What do we do when the shepherds are bad? I think that there are, generally speaking, 3 answers to that question. And the first is the one that is the most tempting, but also very dangerous. The first is this. The temptation is to just get rid of the office entirely. If it's that problematic, just dispense with it. We'd be better off without it. That's the way many think. But this is, in fact, a mistake. Jesus himself, while he's calling out the corruption of the Jewish leaders in his time, in the same breath respects their office. So he counsels his disciples, "Do and observe all things whatsoever they tell you, but do not follow their example." Now keep in mind, he's saying this also to his apostles, through whom he is in the process of actually reconstituting the priesthood in a new way, which means there's never a moment where in Jesus' mind or plan, he intends to ever dispense with this office. And so if we go about trying to do that, what ends up happening is we find ourselves outside of step with the plan, separating ourselves, maybe even unintentionally, from Christ, which is not the solution. But then the second possibility is this, and equally dangerous. If we can't get rid of the office, we might as well just get rid of ourselves, meaning walk away from it all. Just leave. Leave Christ, leave the church. It's simpler that way. And you know, many have already done that. They'll say things like they are spiritual but not religious because they just want God without all the complications that come with having a church. But the truth is, God and his church are inseparable. And Paul makes that crystal clear in his letters in the New Testament. Also, we already know that only in the church do we find the sacraments, and in particular the Eucharist, without which we do not have fellowship with Christ. So walking away from the whole thing, as tempting as that might be, is also not the solution. So what are we going to do? The psalmist from today is the one who gives us the third option. In the simplicity of heart, the psalmist said this: "O Lord, my heart is not proud, nor my eyes haughty. I busy not with great things, nor with things too sublime for me." And in this way, what he's doing is recognizing that though God's plan can be very messy, it's not his place to change it. I busy not with great things, nor with things too sublime for me. But unlike the psalmist, in our times, people will try all sorts of ideas to respond to the problems in the priesthood. Ordained women, they say, because women would never do any of these things. Relax celibacy, because if you just did that, then maybe they would keep themselves under control. Make lay people pastors because they're smarter, better educated. Change the church's teachings. I don't care, whatever, fix it. But the psalmist resists this temptation by acknowledging it's not his place to rewrite God's plan for our salvation. And so what he does in the confusion, in the shadow of the valley, is he just decides to lean on God like a child does in its mother's lap. So he goes on to say, "Like a weaned child on its mother's lap, so is my soul within me." And then he counsels Israel to do the same. "O Israel, hope in the Lord both now and forever." And this is a call to trust. It's not to do nothing, but it is to say, to stay within the confines of God's plan for salvation, trusting that the Lord is acting in and through even the chaos. And this is important that we hear it because maturity and discipleship demands this of us, or we're never going to make it. And that was the lesson that God had for me during that difficult year of second theology. Priests sin. Bishops make bad decisions, and some have even just given themselves over to the devil. There's no question. But none of that negates the power of the gospel nor its message. We can't just leave the church or overthrow Christ's vision every single time it starts to get messy. Because what history has shown again and again and again is that that kind of behavior results in more confusion, fuels more tensions, and bears the fruit that the devil is hoping for in our souls and the souls of others. What I learned that year, as difficult as it was, is that I am not a Catholic, nor would I be a priest because of this priest or that bishop, nor for my personal gain or even security. Rather, I am a Catholic and I am a priest because I believe that Jesus Christ alone is my salvation, that I find him in the embrace of the church, that he has called me by name to serve him this way, and he would never abandon me in that process. And so, like the psalmist, all of us are likewise to abandon ourselves to him in trust. And maybe that kind of a good is that important. And so that said, I feel the need now at this point in the reflection to offer this. The vast majority of priests and bishops, I think, are wonderful. And the psalmist, who rests in God like a weaned child to his mother, finds that spiritual posture reciprocated in Paul, in Thessalonians, who as a priest and a bishop said in today's reading that he loves his people, quote, as a nursing mother cares for her children. And in my experience, most priests and most bishops are like this. Unlike the Levites and the Sadducees and some priests today who distort the instruction of God, Paul, on his part, says the opposite. With such affection for you, we were determined to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our very selves. And again, in my experience, the men who come out of the seminaries today are striving to do the same. So pray for them. Pray for priests. Pray for bishops that we remain faithful, because there's an enemy out there who would like to see us all fall off the path. And pray for our seminarians, especially since we have two from this parish in the seminary, that they would grow with this kind of a priestly heart. And that by their great example, more young men would be inspired and brought forward to do the same.